Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Friends, welcome to Encounter, sponsored by the Broome County Council of Churches. I'm your host, Mark Kimpland, the pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church. Over the past few months, we have taken time in the Encounter program to welcome pastors that are new to the Tri-Cities and to Broome County. And we have shared stories and theologies and understandings of the church with even folks in differing denominations. And so we continue this series of welcoming new pastors to the area. And we are blessed today to have with us the Reverend Kelly Carner, who is the pastor at the McKendree and the Germany Hill United Methodist Church. Kelly, welcome to Broome County and welcome to Encounter.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad you are here. Well, for those that are listening and those that are viewing this, why don't we start right in the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background, perhaps your childhood, schooling, what's brought you to this point with us today.
I was born in Oklahoma and spent most of my child and teen years between Oklahoma and California. And my father owned a business, so I was raised in California, predominantly in my teens. And was always a church family, always went to church. Our church background is Assemblies of God, so we were Pentecostal. Always been a part of that. And when I was very young, when I was 12 years old, is when I was called into the ministry. And some people would say, well, how do you remember something that significant? And I remember that call like it was yesterday. Very, very interesting, very exciting. Remember what I was wearing, remember the whole being afraid to say yes to what I felt was God's call on my life. So it's a very good time.
At 12 years old, can you describe that call a little bit for us as to what happened? And because we were just talking before we went on air here, I mean, if one is not called into ministry, they wouldn't do what it is we do.
Exactly.
So that call is certainly the foundation. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I knew I was called to ministry, but I was still a 12-year-old kid. I had lots of growing up to do. But even then, I started preaching at kids camps and summer youth camps, and in those days it was called Royal Ranger meetings and youth meetings and all those kind of things. And I did that until I was a teenager and moved out of the house and all of that. And the call of God was so strong in my life. It was on a Thursday night. I can remember exactly what I was wearing. The pastor who was there giving that invitation was an evangelist. Orville Kilgore was his name, and giving that invitation to come. And I did go forward to just commit my life to Christ and say yes to that calling, no matter what it was. And he came over to me and he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, "Young man, God has a special call on your heart and you just need to say yes." And I said yes, and I never really looked back. It's not that I didn't question, but I never really looked back. Just saying yes to the power and presence of the Lord in your life. It didn't mean that I wasn't a 12-year-old kid. I still had lots of stuff to go through as a child, as a teenager, as a young man. But I've tried to stay true to that calling of Christ in my heart. And then eventually, as I got older, I became a youth pastor. Went in the full-time ministry in December of 1978. And was ordained in the Assemblies of God in 1981. I was 23 years old, I think, when I was ordained, and I just stayed true to that. And lots of water under that proverbial bridge, so to speak.
Yes, that's a rare animal these days. The idea of being that young and being ordained, and that unfortunately doesn't seem to be the norm in any denomination these days. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your education. Where did you go to school? Where did you take that?
In for my college courses, I graduated from San Diego State with a degree in English with a minor in the 20th century novel. I like to write. I write a lot, and so that was very interesting to me. So I received my English degree from them, and then I switched over to Point Loma Nazarene to begin work on my MDiv. And I did most of my work on my MDiv there, and then I relocated back here to New York to be closer to family and those kind of things that had ended up here through time. So my schooling I finished through multiple courses, online courses and those kind of things. So the formal education for the Assemblies of God was all done through Assemblies of God schools. And then going on to the University of San Diego and going on to Point Loma Nazarene is how I got there.
Okay. Now take us, if you can, we were talking about this a little earlier, take us through the appointment process, or how the churches that you've served. Can you kind of chronologically take us through there to the present?
I served Webster United Methodist Church for 15 years, and I was an outside hire there. At the time, I was doing evangelistic work, and I would go on the weekends. I would fly out and go hold revivals. That was kind of my thing. And worship seminars, those kind of things combined. And that's what I was doing. I was working on finishing my MDiv at Northeastern Seminary, and there was a little post-it note, literally a 3x5 postcard on the school bulletin board, and the school's secretary had taken that card down, and it was just simply handwritten, looking for a contemporary worship pastor. And that's how it all started, was that postcard. And so she handed it to me, knowing that was my background. So I went over and looked at the church and thought, before I say yes to this, because it was a long road to come from the Assemblies of God back into the United Methodist Church. And I did a lot of praying about it, so covertly my wife and I just attended the church for a couple of Sundays just to see what it was all about.
Good move.
And all of those kind of things. And then we began meeting with the appropriate people and all of that, and they ended up hiring us, and we went to work for the church as an outside hire, and really not even 10 hours a week, just putting together the contemporary service. But you know, if you're in ministry, there's no such thing as part-time. You're either all in or it's not going to happen. And so that's kind of what I brought to it. And after a period of time, I really began to feel like the Lord was calling me to get further involved in this movement, to become part of the United Methodist Church. But I was really struggling with that. So I talked to my brother-in-law, who's also an Assembly of God pastor, and he said, I don't know what your battle is, you're just coming home. And I explain what you mean by that. And he said, well, you know, out of the history of the United Methodist, before they were United Methodist, when we were all the other Methodist names, he said the Assemblies of God were birthed, and you're really just coming back home. And once I kind of put that to rest, I started on the process of becoming a local pastor and those kind of things. And I just continued to serve the church. And along that period, the church kind of upped my hours and increased what I was doing and those things. And then I eventually became full-time. And then the last 3 years of that 15 years I was there, I served Hamlin United Methodist Church, which is out on the westernmost part of the Genesee Valley district, up close to the lake. And we served that church for 3 years. So combined together, 40 miles between churches on a Sunday morning. It was quite the ride. You know, we'd go in, do the early service, hop in the truck and fly out to Hamlin and do church out there as well. So that's how it all came to be where I am, where I was there. And then in January of this year, got the phone call from our district superintendent in the Genesee Valley informing me that this was the call and that I would be getting a phone call from the DS of this district. And it was just a day or two later that he did that. He called us. We arranged to meet, my wife and I and our district superintendent, Dave Kofel, and we met. They laid out what it was all about, and I kind of shook my head a little bit. And you know what it is, it's like we need an answer in 24 hours, and you just kind of go, I don't know that God has 24 hours to listen to me, kind of a thing. But I knew it was time for a change. I just wasn't sure where that change would lead me. But when we say yes to the presence of the Lord in our life, we just kind of go where He tells us to go, and we kind of make it work. And I believe that statement that's out there, you know, God will bring you to it, and He'll also see it through it. And so that's what brought us to this area.
Awesome. Now, there may be some viewers and listeners. I'm intrigued because you've lived in a few different camps with the Assemblies of God and United Methodist. Could you just briefly touch on similarities, differences, theologies? What do you see as the main difference, or could you define each one through the lens in which you've experienced that?
I would think that for the Assemblies of God, one of the clearest places you would go would be Pentecostal charismatic, believing in and exercising the charismatic gifts. Having that, they are predominantly evangelical, predominantly conservative. That would be that camp. Okay. Fundamental theology is basically the same. They wouldn't follow quite as much the Wesleyan train of thought on some of those things. They would come to difference on a little bit on between child dedication and child baptism. That would probably be one of the biggest ones there. Where in the United Methodist Church, we do have some churches that are evangelical, some churches that are charismatic, not so much in the East Coast, maybe more in the Bible Belt of the country. Right. But it would be those two camps. And when it all shakes out, we serve one God. We have one scripture, regardless which interpretation you use. And he calls us all to be faithful followers of Christ. And our role is to go forth and make disciples of all the world, regardless of what, I call it franchise, what franchise you hang on it. And I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad that all those years ago I said yes to the Lord, not having any idea that all these years later I would find myself in Carner, New York. But that's how that goes. Here you are. Here I am.
So you've been serving these two churches since July 1st of this year and such things. I guess the next logical question from one pastor to another is, how's it going?
It is going great.
What excites you? What gets you up in the morning? What's the vision, the mission? Can you touch on that a little bit?
I serve two churches. I serve Germany Hill United Methodist Church, which is just in a little area. Just kind of southwest of Carner, and I serve McKendree United Methodist Church, which is in the town of Carner. Both of them are very old churches in terms of establishment, back in the late 1800s, both of them. Germany Hill is a beautiful little church, a beautiful little structure. It is a God-loving group of people. They are faithful to the call. They've been there. It's one of those churches that has tremendous family history. This name in this community and this family has been a part of this church almost since it was built. So that's part of Germany Hill's heritage. McKendree was named after one of the founding fathers of United Methodism in the United States, and a direct worker for Asbury back in the days. So that's where that comes from. And again, McKendree UMC has been a church that has flourished over the years and has gone up and down, up and down, up and down. And in the last several years, probably I would say more than 10, have been in a steady decline. They're good people, they're faithful people. But one of the things we lose sight of is what's next for church, because we're such a church of, we've always done it this way, and this is not how we've ever done it before. And all of a sudden we look around, and those who want to do it differently, those who want to establish the work of the church for tomorrow, they're gone, because they've gone to a place who will do it differently.
Absolutely.
And so this is a group of people who, I would say a couple of years ago, came together and said, what are we going to do to make our church relevant 10 years from now? Should the Lord tarry 20 years from now, what are we going to do to still have a McKendree United Methodist Church? So they recognized in and of themselves that change has to come. And change is never easy for anyone. It's